Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/spookshow. Then go over to morbidlybeautiful.com as we are now part of the Morbidly Beautiful Podcasting Network.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You're too! You're too! You're too!
Everybody here dies by dawn. Dead by dawn!
Welcome to the Spookshow. Hello, welcome back to the All-American Spookshow podcast. I'm Josh, and I'm joined here with Tiana.
Hey.
And the Professor Smoke.
What's up?
And today we're going to a bona fide cult classic. This isn't Cult Corner, but it's definitely a horror classic, I would say, in a lot of regards. And that's the original The Blob from 1958. One could argue, though, that I think that one, was it 88, that remake?
Yeah, yep.
That
30
one's-
years after this one.
Yeah, that one's probably a little bit more regarded in some ways. You know, like, I guess because it's more gory and more...
Yeah.
I
more-
guess, yeah.
say
I mean,
current horror than this, right?
yeah, I guess it depends on the generation, I guess, and how they view classic 50s horror versus 80s if they grew up in that time period and everything.
Sure,
I mean, us
yeah.
coming from that era, you know, I've said it before. I think I even had it on way back when we did that favorite remakes, whatever it was
Yeah.
we did that video. So I think I definitely had the Blob in there. I don't remember if it's number 3, 4, or whatever, but it was up there pretty good because I do love that remake.
Yeah, and this one is very 50s, is it not? Like,
Oh, yeah.
And I love that about it.
oh yeah,
Yeah, I'm
absolutely, I do
those
too.
people that-
But like,
yeah.
it wears the 50s.
Oh yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you know, it is very, very 50s. Like in everything that is, not just the style, not just the cars, not just the music, all the gimmick shit that has to do with this movie. We'll get into everything about it. It's a very 50s
Yeah.
type of movie. And dare you say, like, one of the foundational type of drive-in type of these type of movies, right?
Definitely, yeah, yeah. And if you were to ask our parents' generation, they'd probably say something to say. Like if you were to say, maybe you know what, my parents, my dad, they weren't that huge into horror movies, but they knew the Blob for sure.
Yeah.
You know,
It was one of those, like, you know, they didn't have such a thing as viral hits like them, but like if there is an equivalent
Yeah.
to it, it kind of was that, right? It's kind of a low budget, but you got to go kind of see this kind of movie for 1958, right? Probably.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's got
best I can tell, it was only made for about 100, give or take a little over $100,000, and it went on to I guess an estimated box office of over 4 million. So
yeah,
and these were when ticket prices were what, probably a quarter, maybe a little more. I don't know, but I always say that because they actually say something about that in the movie with the theater, right? Like when they bring them out, it's like, well, you just made me waste my 80 cents. Now what's the problem here? You know, later on in the movie. So roughly, you know, might have been paying 50 cents to $1 or so, if that, back then.
mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of tickets. I'm sure somewhere there's like, you know, because, you know, a lot of those old movies like Gone with the Wind, stuff like that, they always say like adjusted for inflation.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Those movies might have been like some of the biggest ever made, like Ben-Hur, Ten Commandments, stuff like that, because all the numbers we have are ticket counts. We don't necessarily have a number.
yeah.
You know,
Box
a
office draw
number.
of the actual dollars.
Yeah. So like if you equate it, right, well, the ticket sales and then equate it to what that ticket would cost you today, like those movies made billions, you know, in today's money.
Yeah. Yep.
So 4 million. I think I saw. Well, actually, the inflation. I didn't look at the inflation calculator. I know, like, if you're comparing stuff to the 80s, because I had to look this up once for the show, that like you triple it. So say $1 million back then is 3 million now, right? Roughly, give or take. Give or take a few bucks.
Yeah.
So God knows what it is in the 50s, right? Still, so 4 million point is a lot for a movie like this.
Yeah.
So very successful.
And while we're talking about this, it's probably a good time just to mention this, is they didn't know that they had no idea this movie was going to do that kind of, box office drawing or whatever. And least of all, Stephen McQueen, who is in this movie, is Steve. What's his last name in the movie? He plays Steven in the movie.
Steve, yeah. Real original name. Yeah.
Yeah. Steve Reynolds. Is that what it was? No.
I don't recall offhand, but yeah.
I forget.
I just remember Steve because I was just, oh, that's funny.
Yeah. And anyway,
Steve Andrews. Steve Andrews in the movie.
Steve Andrews. Okay.
Yeah.
he was given the choice of taking $2,500 cash or taking 10% of the draw of the movie, right? And he went with the $2,500 cash because he didn't think it was going to do anything, and really neither did most of the people involved with it, I think. And then it went on to make, like you said, 4.5 or however, over $4 million.
Yeah.
So
Steve,
yeah, he went the wrong way there.
Steve McQueen pulled a real Steve Andrews on that one and didn't didn't think it through. Well, like you said, who's to know? Who would he? How would he know? How would anybody know? Because like one thing that I saw about it was like the reception at the time. Obviously, it's kind of a big hit with the teenagers, and that's what they were obviously aiming for. Was that new at the time new teenage drive-in crowd, right? Who would have known that? This cheap ass flick that he made, and that's the other thing too. Steve McQueen. We were looking at him. He's right on the cusp of like becoming quote unquote Steve McQueen. He ain't there yet. This is like,
in fact, he wasn't even going by Steve McQueen, right? He was going by Stephen McQueen. At this point, this is the last movie that he did that with.
He's credited as Stephen McQueen on the posters. Everything is Stephen, and then I think after that, he was just Steve. But right after, not long, like literally within the next year or two, he's on that show. I think it was Wanted Dead or Alive. He was on that for years, and then what was it? The Magnificent Seven. He's in that, and then off to the races throughout the '60s. Right, as one of the biggest actors in Hollywood.
There's a bit of a tie-in there with I don't know the name, but the guy who kind of, I guess, created or produced that show, Wanted Dead or Alive, had seen before the Blob came out, had seen the dailies or had seen something. I guess he's been involved with that studio, whatever the case, but saw Steve McQueen in the Blob before the movie ever even came out, and knew that he wanted him for that show. So that kind of helped him out. Maybe he only took the $2,500 and didn't take the 10% of $4 million, but he definitely went on. Somebody saw him in this movie and put him in that, and then his career took off after that. So either way, he got his money back. Right?
I love too that he and his girlfriend in the movie, which was his girlfriend's name was Jane Martin in the movie, but it was played by Annetta Corsott. Annetta Corsott went on to become Helen Crump, the longtime girlfriend of Andy Griffith in the Andy Griffith Show.
And I believe this was our debut movie. Feature
maybe.
film, I believe I read.
I could believe it, but I thought I only bring her up in particular because they're clearly playing teenagers, and they do not look like teenagers. So I was like, how old were they at this point? She was 25 at this point, and he was 28. So he's almost a 30-year-old man playing a teenager. And I didn't look far enough, but in the credits at the beginning of the movie, it was like starring Steve McQueen, Annetta Corsott, Earl Rowe. And then right after this is and introducing the teenagers. And then there's like, 4 or 5 names under that. So like I didn't go back to see if those people were teenagers, but to my recollection, only 1 or 2 of them actually look like they might be teenagers. The rest, it's clearly like 25-plus-year-old men and women, playing teenagers.
and also Stephen McQueen, he didn't like this movie at all. And maybe it has something to do with the fact that he chose the $2,500 and not 10% of $4 million.
Well, that
for a while he didn't.
That would sour you. Every time you think of son of a bitch, I left like
so for a while,
hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table.
Apparently, he must have came around to liking it because I did see that upon his death, he did have this poster in his bedroom. The Blob poster was on the wall in his bedroom.
How did he pass away? What was it with him? Was it in a car accident or something like that? What was it with him?
I'm not. Yeah, I should have looked that up, but I saw that piece of information about the poster, and I meant to go further to look that up, but then I got sidetracked with something else, and I didn't. So I'm not sure how he died.
Or am I thinking of? Maybe I'm thinking of James Dean. Around the same
James
time.
Dean definitely was
because he died in 1980. So I don't remember exactly what happened to him, but man, he was huge throughout the 60s and 70s, and still to this day, like some of the coolest movies of that time period. Right, star Steve McQueen.
Oh yeah.
Some movies that we will definitely get to here in one way or another. Not because they're horror, but just because they're awesome. Like on Cult Corner, like The Great Escape,
definitely.
Bullet. I mean, tons of great movies that dude was in. We should have done the Towering Inferno back when we did the Summer Disaster series.
Yep. There's another thing that triggered something else off for me, and then also about the Blob is like when the Towering Inferno came out and he gained that much more popularity, they re-released the Blob at that time period, and. And I think some of the got a little bit of flack over it, but I think some of the blurbs on the posters for the re-release mentioned something like in the style of I can't remember the director's name of Towering Inferno, but something like that. It tried to tie in with the Towering Inferno.
Yeah.
It has nothing at all to do with that type of movie, you know, disaster. It tried to tie in with a disaster in the style of a so-and-so disaster film or whatever, you know, whoever made the Towering Inferno.
That's just in a long line of like shameless promotion on movies.
Yeah.
You know, like Trick or Treat stars Ozzy Osbourne and Gene Simmons. Yeah, my ass.
Yeah.
You know, they're in it a combined like 3 minutes, you know. But yet, though, they were, you know, up until finally we got a good release now, right, on Blu-ray. Like, up until then, it was always them on the cover of the shitty DVD release of the early 2000s.
Yeah.
This movie was directed by Irvin S. Yeaworth and was written by, it's a screenplay by Theodore Simonson and Kate Lanacher, which in the credits you'll see her name is Kate Phillips. But the original idea was from Irvin H. Milgate. So yeah, like very successful type of movie of the time. A few notable character actors, you know, that people you've seen in other stuff of the time, you know, such as like Earl Rowe and one of the guys that plays one of the dads, Albert Smith. You know, tons of stuff like that. And then that one old lady, Eleanor Hammer, was played by Eleanor Hammer. You know, the one that comes in like, you've torn the doctor's office up. I've got to clean it up right now. Man, we've got fingerprints. Can I dust around them? That meddling old bag. That was Eleanor Hammer. So, you know, character actors, stuff like that, you know. But this movie definitely had one hell of a life. God knows that $4 million number may not even be right. You know, because like all the years that it played in drive-ins and theaters and stuff like that, and kept getting re-released and all that stuff. And then you said, Smoke, there was a sequel that I kind of forgot about, right?
Yeah, it's called Well, it had a few different titles, like this one, as you'll get into in a little bit, I believe. But the sequel was called, the main title, I think, was Beware the Blob. Mm-hmm. And it also was called Son of the Blob, was another title for it. I've never seen that one. That was from 1972, I believe it was. And it is, though, looking up a little bit of information on it, it is pretty much a direct sequel that takes place 15 years after the Blob. And, you know, all right, spoiler alert here for anybody who hasn't seen this movie since it came out in 1958 for some reason, if you haven't seen it or know anything about it. Spoiler alert from this point on, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, how in the end of this movie, they allude to the fact that they need to get it to the Arctic, right, because of the cold. Right?
Yeah.
So that movie kind of takes place there where somebody that was gone to that Arctic, that had something to do with the care of it, I guess, or whatever, or making sure that it's stayed. Some reason he takes a piece of it, I guess, back from the Arctic with him, and then of course it probably thaws out, and I assume, and then causes all kind of chaos again. So, but it is a direct sequel, I guess.
And that makes sense, right? Because even once again, spoiler, at the very end of this movie, you see him drop it in the Arctic, and then it says "the end?" question mark. You know, there's the big. So even they may not have known that there would be a sequel, but they probably had it in the back of their heads, like, well, if this does well. Maybe one day, and then it took them that long to do it.
Also, we should probably mention who the big director of that movie was. Maybe, well, for the few people that will remember this that are our age or older. The Beware the Blob 1972 sequel was directed by none other than J.R. Ewing from Dallas. You know, Larry Hagman.
Larry Hagman.
What was the blurb you said?
Oh, yeah, I saw that when they released it on home video, I guess, at some point in the 80s, right? It's on VHS, so it's after that stuff in... that showed Dallas. The whole thing, now you have to set up the joke, right? There was this whole thing in what was it, 83, 84? It's early to mid 80s.
Yeah, early to mid 80s. Yeah.
They had this whole not subplot, but they had this whole plot in the show Dallas where his character J.R. Ewing got shot at the end of one season, and then you had to wait over the summer to the beginning of the next season to figure out who shot him.
Did it, right?
Who did this? So
who shot JR? That whole thing.
Yeah, it was the whole summer. It's like, who shot JR? There's probably people walking around with shirts and everything. It was a whole fucking thing. Right?
Yeah, it was a big.
Who shot JR?
Yeah.
Well, they released this movie, Beware the Blob, that he directed on VHS, and the tag on the tapes or whatever says the movie that JR shot. So shameless promotion, you know. Of, let's take something that has nothing to do with it and then use it to our advantage. And I guarantee there was more than a few people like, oh, really? And then, you know.
Yeah, checked it out just based on that alone.
Yeah, I guarantee it. Because, like, dude, if there's anything that we could compare close to like today is something that goes viral on YouTube or some shit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's what that was. That was a huge thing in the mid '80s. The Who Shot JR bullshit.
Or like the Tiger King from a few years back, right?
Yeah, yeah. Whatever you want to compare it to, something that like grabs the attention of everybody, and everybody just like latches on to it. That's what that was at that time. So, yeah, I'm sure it probably influenced a few sales of the copies of that VHS for sure. That and sales of I Dream of Jeannie, because wasn't he in that?
Yeah.
Sales of I Dream of Jeannie VHS. Random episodes. Who knows?
Time for refreshment. Refreshment. For your enjoyment, there's hot, fresh popcorn, tempting, delicious hot dogs, and so many kinds of ice cream. And, of course, sparkling, delicious, ice-cold Coca-Cola for everybody at the refreshment counter now.
For you listeners of the All-American Spook Show podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give it an opportunity to check out their service. So I hopped on over to audible.com and I typed in The Blob to see what would pop up. And damn if we didn't have some stuff that looks like probably not necessarily directly attached to this, the actual Blob movie, but stuff to do with some type of blob. We've got Blob, a love story by Maggie Sue. And that one is just over 7 hours long. And then we've got, this is a Goosebumps novel, The Blob That Ate Everyone. Classic Goosebumps novel, book 28 by R.L. Stine. That one is a little over 2 hours long. None of those are like deep reads, right? Goosebumps. Let's see. We've also got, here's one, Bob and the Blob. It's by Simon Carr. It's book 4 of the Apocalypse Blocker series. You got me. A little under 4. Yeah, Apocalypse Blockers. It's a little under 4.5 hours long. So, if any of that, and there's, I think about 40 something results over on Audible. So if you want to check any of those out, we encourage you to go over to audibletrial.com/spookshow. Again, that's audibletrial.com/spookshow to get your free audio books. And I'm going to hop on back over to imdb.com and click on plot summary to see what depths they can help us explain this movie a little bit more. Boy, there's a long one. I'm not reading that. Donnie's not around. I don't have to read the long ones anymore. We've got the one sentence one. An alien life form consumes everything in its path as it grows and grows. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all you need to know, really. We'll go a little bit deeper though. I'll read you not as long as that one description here. Or the longest one, I mean. This one was submitted by Gary KMCD on IMDb. After teenagers Steve Andrews and his girlfriend Jane Martin see a meteorite crash nearby, they set off to investigate. They come across an old man who seems to have some type of gelatinous matter stuck to his hand. They take him to Dr. Holland, who isn't sure what the substance is, but Steve becomes convinced it's a monster of some sort after both the old man and the doctor vanish. As the creature consumes more and more people, it grows larger and larger. Steve's biggest problem is that he can't get anyone to believe him and continually faces skeptical policemen and angry parents. The creature finally reaches a size that it cannot be missed, and everyone wonders how they will possibly stop it. Yeah, there's a lot of that. Like, that's basically one of the main, would you say one of the main themes or things of the movie is like, maybe we should listen to the teenagers,
Yeah, because and man, I don't know how many movies before this, but certainly a lot of movies after this use that plot device of, kids, whether they're teenagers or preteens, seeing something and then trying to get the adults to believe it, or the police or the authorities of some sort, right? And that goes well into the 80s.
Yeah,
maybe even into the 90s.
And I will say though, to its credit, that Blob's a sneaky bastard.
Yeah, he's evading. He's like, oh, I'm gonna fuck with these kids, and nobody's gonna believe them. Oh, it'll be funny. It'll be great.
Yeah. The Blob was really thinking this out. Tell me, I'm not the only one though that thought of the Stephen King bit from Creepshow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Neither of us had seen this movie in a long time, probably.
Yeah.
And as soon as that part comes on, where as soon as you see the meteor hit the ground and the old guy's going out after it and he pokes it with a stick, I was like, meteor shit.
Yeah, dude, that was when I make notes while I'm watching the movie, and the only thing I could think of was meteor shit.
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious where Stephen King and Romero and all that got right. Like, they just took that one scene of that old dude in that cabin from the Blob, and then just made it something a little different, similar but different, right? That's all they did.
Yeah. Well, what's great is that I don't know if we talked about this in this show, if it was just off air between us, but these filmmakers that in the '80s, let's say John Carpenter, George Romero, who else? Toby Hooper, all these guys that have done these movies.
Of similar
They throw
age.
these things in there of similar ages.
Yeah.
They throw these things in there, and then it passes. So fans, we who were fans of them in the '80s, picked up on this stuff sort of subconsciously through them. They're 50,
you're right.
and then they would blatantly do the stuff like The Thing that John Carpenter did, or The Blob that I forget the director, then not Ken Russell. That would be an interesting Blob movie. Not Ken Russell, but it was a Russell, Chuck Russell, maybe the special effects guy directed it. And then Toby Hooper did Invaders from Mars, right? So you get all but before they did those, you were still picking up on these things like Creep Show, like you're talking about.
Yeah, and
then
Stephen King too, right? He's of similar age. Like
a
lot of his
a
lot of his stories, his short stories especially, they're all similar themes, just rip-offs kind of these old flicks.
Yeah, he just moved them into sort of a modern for the time, which would have been the '80s or late '70s or whatever when he started, writing and whatnot.
Yeah.
Well, or when he started being published and stuff. So it's the Tommyknockers. The Tommyknockers is modernized for the '80s, but I mean he's still using a lot of these themes. So when you read those as a kid, you're picking up the stuff from the '50s through that, and then you go back and you see these movies too, and it was the '50s was to the '80s what the '80s are now to kids, I guess.
Yeah, I think we all kind of picked up on a lot of these themes and stories and stuff by osmosis of that, but also like even us growing up, we're becoming a little bit of the old heads now, a little bit, right? We're we're past our prime, or not past our prime. You know what I mean? We're past the.
Yeah.
How about this? We're past the target demographic of most things anymore. How about that?
Yeah. Now, some of us also watch these things probably more than.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like we used to
to
watch these things too, even when we were kids.
Oh yeah,
growing up, because
definitely.
like this was the shit that was shown on your local station matinee, or maybe this is the shit like maybe you like this kind of stuff, so you went and rented it from the video store. So we watched the old stuff too.
Yeah,
when we were
I think it's technology. Technology now has made it so that kids today aren't going to be exposed the way we were to the things from the '50s, let's say, or whatever. They aren't as exposed to things because we were at the mercy of television only. We didn't have the internet. I mean, nowadays you go on the internet, you pull up whatever you want to see, so pretty much. So
trust me,
my
near 14-year-old son's not going to go bring up Max and watch The Blob from 1958. He's just not going to do it. Not on his own.
We did, because like you said, we watch reruns on TV, or if you were even lucky enough to have cable. We didn't have cable where I was at for a while. I'd go over to our cousin's house and they had cable.
Yeah.
You're watching USA Network and all these, and you're seeing Godzilla movies from the early days of Godzilla movies from the, late '50s and early '60s and stuff. And so you come to all this stuff by TV because you have no choice because you don't have anything else to watch. So then you get a taste for it, or you don't. If you do get a taste for it, then video stores come along, then you're going to the video stores and you're renting those movies as well as whatever latest early '80s thing there is out there as well. So you're getting introduced to it all these different ways. But now unless kids get the taste for that some other way through their parents or whatever, they don't get that. They don't have that same experience of having to watch these things on TV.
Now they get it from TikTok.
Now it's
I'm like, my daughter, I'm like, where did you know about that movie from?
Oh yeah. Somebody did a 15-second TikTok thing on it or something.
But they only know certain clips. You know what I mean? Like they might get sucked in by like a 30-second clip of the movie where something stupid happens, something silly.
Yeah.
Oh, that looks funny, and then they watch it and they're like, or if they even, or even if they care to follow up any more past. That's their only exposure to it.
Yeah. And again, it all has to do with technology these days. And now, especially with that, like I said, TikTok and those things, the attention span's not there for something like The Blob. Nobody, you might see The Blob, taking over the theater or doing this or that or whatever. People running out the theater or some quick blurb of it, but
you'll see the big moments, but that's it. Yeah, like, and I'll admit that. Look, I enjoy this movie, and I've seen it a number of times, although it's been a long time. This movie is slow. That's what I was getting to about the sneaky. Like the Blob is sneaky as fuck. Like there's huge chunks of the movie where the Blob is
You don't see
around,
it.
but you're not seeing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's one of those kind of slow burn in a way. You know, it's not until you see it intermittently, slowly eating people and slowly getting larger throughout the movie. Most of the movie is just the adults not listening to the teenagers, and then finally they have to force them to listen to them by turning on the air raid siren and honking the horns and everything, right? Like they just wake everybody in the town up and say, "Look, motherfuckers, there it is," and then finally, they listen. But that's most of the movie until you get to the action of the last 10 or 15 minutes, right? It's a hard sell for maybe the younger folks to
to sit through the hour and 20 some odd minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I sat there and watched. I didn't even try to get my kids. Obviously, my 6-year-old, she ain't gonna watch this. But even my soon to be 14-year-old, he ain't watching this either. It crossed my mind for a minute, like I'm watching this. Come down here and sit. And I was like, nah, I don't want to put them through it. I didn't even try.
Oh, one thing we didn't mention yet. I don't know how we haven't mentioned it since we started this, but what about that theme song in the credits?
Oh yeah. What is the name of that song? Is it just The Blob?
I think it's just called The Blob.
Yeah, probably.
Also, the song is The Blob by the Five Blobs. And who are the Five Blobs? Well, Burt Bacharach, before he was even known, was one of the backing singers on there. And there was 4 other backing singers that were the Five Blobs, right? Some other studio session musicians, I guess, or whatever. But then I can't remember the name. The main vocals is not Burt Bacharach, and I can't remember the guy's name right now. But he ran his vocals through some processing of some sort back then, and gave it that horror sort of a Igor, Boris Karloff, whatever.
It's got that
sound.
50s Monster Mash type of sound to it, right?
Yeah, it's so he did some passing his vocals over a few times or whatever, and getting it to that sound or whatever. I can't remember who that guy's name is right now, but
it took me a minute to realize that this was like a Blob-centric song. For a second there, I was like, "Yeah, what is this generic ass song?" And then he starts, "It's the Blob, here it comes," or whatever the hell he says. And I'm like, "Wait a minute."
Yeah, the lyrics are like, that didn't happen a lot in the 50s in these types of movies. You really didn't have much songs with vocals in them, right?
Yeah, you're right. Usually it's just some instrumental, some dramatic, everything we've watched on Hammer Horror in Order. Like that's most movies. It's like some dramatic orchestral at best. Orchestral thing, that's it.
It had a full, and it actually made it to like a national hit here in the U.S.
That was my one question. Like, so I'm assuming they must have sold the shit out of some 45s of.
Back in the day. And I assume maybe it was a shortened version. It seemed like it took a while before it got to the lyrics. I mean, it was going with the same beat with that. It was going for a while, but then like partway through, then the lyrics come up. So I'm assuming that the single probably got right into the lyrics. I think.
Yeah, and you got the kind of cool animated look of the credits. And that guy. The same guy did all that animation with the power line too. Like when the power line, they shoot the power line down and it hits the blob and there's that animated lightning effect type stuff, right? Yeah.
He did that. The same guy did all those animations. Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't think of his name right now, but
I mean, it doesn't hold a candle to anything these days, but it's a pretty cool effect for a 1958 movie, right?
And speaking of that, we might as well talk about the blob itself too, because the blob still is around today and still exists. Apparently, it's in a bucket, I guess, or at least it was last time I was reading this information about it. That it was made of silicone and red dye, basically. That was the main blob that you see. It's sort of the size of a beach ball or something. I
didn't think to look this up. Maybe you might have seen something like this. Seems like they might have invented slime or some shit, right? Was slime a thing? Like now, kids think of slime. Like, and when we were growing up, Nickelodeon slime and all that shit. Like, was that a thing before this?
Now, I didn't necessarily read about unless that's still unless that's the more liquid form of the silicone and the red food dye. Then they had. I know they put it around a weather balloon to make it move. The scenes when it's like moving down the aisle or the the sort of to give it movement, they put the silicone and stuff over a weather balloon. So I'm guessing maybe it's just that silicone and red dye in its liquid form. I don't know. I didn't really read necessarily what made that part in the beginning, like whenever it's on the old guy's hand, when it first goes from the meteorite and it's dripping down the stick, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I don't know exactly what that is, if that's
Yeah.
the same stuff or something more liquidy, but
Yeah.
I just know that the main blob is said was silicone and red food dye, but I'm assuming that's the more rounded shaped blob that was, moving around in certain scenes.
And that had to have been, get back to the Stephen King Creepshow thing for a second. That had to have been the obvious take on the story is, so this old fucker's first reaction to seeing a meteorite fall from the sky is to take a stick and poke it.
Poke it and then poke the ooze in it and then let the ooze run down the stick.
Yeah.
So it's almost on his hand, and then it does sentiently go to his hand.
Like, that's such a doofus thing to do. So that had to have been what King and Romero seized on. Like, oh, this old doofus, like, he's stupid.
Yeah, they're just going to take it to the utmost satirical point.
They just took it, turned it up to 11, right? But like,
Gordy Barrel, you little kid, you done it
me
again.
or shit. They had to have seized on that, like, this old dummy out here poking on it for no reason with a stick, let's take that and dial it up. But
and unfortunately, if Donnie was here, he probably would have been. I'm sure he's probably seen the Blob before, but he wouldn't have done too happy with the dog scene. I mean, not that it's shown, but it happens.
Well, now wait a minute. Now they said there's the dog, right? And then, like, they're locked in the freezer, and then you hear a dog barking or whatever, and then the dog is dead, or you assume, right? Well, then there was something when the group comes up, they say something about, like, what are you talking about, that dog? Oh, yeah, we saw him running down the street over there. So, like,
oh, really?
Yeah, that's the way they wave it off, like, the dog's okay. He just, the dog's the smart one. He just ran away. He was he was the clever one.
I thought we saw that too with somewhere where they were including that in like a death count.
Oh, yeah, it was a death count.
So somebody who was doing that didn't pay attention either, I guess.
Yeah, I'm almost positive. Like, unless I saw some weird Criterion Collection cut, because that's what it was on.
No, you're right.
Yeah,
they
said that. Oh no, we saw that dog running up the street. He's okay, So she's like, oh, okay, I'm relieved. The girlfriend, and then they just move on from there. So that was cool when you get towards the end and you see that movie theater. And that's kind of the big reveal to the town, like, holy shit, this is real, right? Like, where the Blob comes in and at the theater. But, like, I was thinking, would theaters like this be super common in 1958?
Yeah, I think they kind of were, as far as, I mean, maybe not in a small town like this kind of town is portrayed as being a small town. Probably not so much that, maybe. But I know there were a lot of theaters that were, at this point, you already got some, like let's talk about the Grindhouse thing for just a second in New York. You already had some of those theaters that were closing because had already closed because of the Great Depression, right?
Yeah,
it happened in the 30s.
And they had already seen their heyday and became like XXX theaters and shit like that, right? So,
well, at this point they were like playhouses for like actual actors putting on plays.
Yeah.
And then there was a ton of those, but then after the Great Depression, those kind of went under. They reopened after the Great Depression later on, and like in the 40s and even into the 50s, they reopened as theaters. They had screens put in.
All right, that's the passage of time. You just traveled through the time machine. So, like, to explain exactly what just happened is when you were listening to it there, and it just kind of maybe it didn't make quite sense. Like, why would we be jumping ahead like this? Well, it's because when we originally recorded the first part of this episode, I lost power. Like, down the street from me, somebody hit a power pole and it knocked the power out. So we wrapped up the recording with that night, and we decided to come pick the rest of this thing up at a later date. So that's why there's the weird passage of time here. So I think overall, I think you kind of appreciate this movie for what it is for something from 1958, right? So that will kind of sum up exactly what we were just talking about there. So I guess we'll get started with our final thoughts and our ratings on this one. I think ultimately it's about as dry as you would expect in some ways for this kind of movie from 1958, but it's also a lot of fun too. It's certainly not one of my favorites from the era. I guess it's kind of one of my favorites from the era, but it's not like a top 2 or 3 from there. There's a few others that come to mind that I like. Say the first Godzilla movies and stuff like that came right before this. So there's some stuff in the late 50s that I like more than this, but this isn't bad. And Steve McQueen does pretty good, and everybody else is just kind of there, right? The teenagers. Um, I'll go with 2.5. I think that's a solid kind of like, you need to kind of see it for, I think, kind of where it stands historically in horror history, kind of. But it's not. I don't think it's one you would watch over and over again or something like that. And it was kind of a phenomenon kind of movie at the time too. So you have to give consideration for that. So I'll go with 2.5 stars for this one. So, Smoke, what do you think?
Oh yeah, I really enjoy it. It's, as you said, it's not the greatest written one, but then also I think that kind of comes from how far out we are from it now. I
True.
mean, at the
True.
time when it came out, it probably was kind of fairly original. I think I don't know how many. A lot of these started repeating themselves or whatever, but I mean, this was 1958, right?
Yeah.
You've already you've already gotten a few years into the, what do you want to call it, atomic horror, Cold War horror type stuff. But I think it was still it's original for the time, and it certainly has spawned a lot of outright rip-offs, homages,
Yeah.
and everything else, going all the way up to the remake in 1988, to things like Night of the Creeps. Remember that movie? Which is, I mean, that Night of the Creeps has a lot of homage to a lot of different sci-fi and horror movies of the time, but especially the Blob. So yeah, I think it's very influential. It's certainly a movie that people from that era, if they remember seeing, like my parents remember seeing it, whether it was at the drive-in or whatever. So I think it has a lot of people who saw it in that era had a lot of a fondness for it, I guess, too. But again, like you said, it's not the greatest. It's not my favorite either. But I do give it, I guess, a little bit higher marks. Maybe I just absolutely love classic horror, anyways. And we haven't really delved into it. I mean, overall, I don't know what our ratio is of classic horror, say, to more modern horror, but I'm sure we haven't delved that deep into the classics yet, from say the 30s and 40s and 50s. We've dipped our toes in here and there, and whatnot. So, but we'll be getting to more of that too down the road, I guess. But at this point, I think I'll give it 3.5.
Tiana, what do you say?
This one's a classic. And yeah, I do like the uniqueness of it, and just that whole, creature that comes out and how big it gets and stuff. And I mean, for that time, that probably was kind of creepy. So, but I'm gonna give it a 2.5, like you.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely unique. I mean, it's something that's been copied, and there've been a lot of homages and stuff like that over the years, but definitely for the time, very unique. And the fact, I think what kind of lends to its creepiness, number one, like we were talking about earlier, how sneaky how sneaky this blob is. Like, it shouldn't be this sneaky, but it is sneaky in the movie. But also that, like, it keeps getting bigger. Like that realization of, oh shit, the more it eats, the bigger it gets. The bigger it gets, the more of a threat this fucking thing is. So like, they ultimately have to figure out a way to stop it. And the best way they could was cold. Which leads to the end of the movie where they dump it in the Arctic, and then eventually that leads to the sequel where they find it, or some manner of it, right? And you saw that was coming, because the end ? Right? So
No, yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's very unique, for sure. It's one of those kind of movies, like you said, Smoke, of the time, that should be seen just for that, for that aspect of it too. Plus, like you were mentioning, like the ratios or whatever of like what we've watched. We haven't watched a lot of stuff from the 50s. I mean, there's been some stuff like the original Godzilla, and there's a handful of others, but we haven't watched a lot. So we probably need to make more of an effort to change that. When we have these opportunities to watch these older ones.
True, yeah.
But I will say it probably won't be anytime soon, unless it has something to do with Sasquatches, because coming up in the month of June, we're going to begin our big summer event. And, we've already talked about that back when we did our first ever winter event. The what was that? Polar Predators. I was going to say, like, what was it? Yeti Yam Bags or whatever the hell you
Yeti Yankers.
Yeti Yankers, yeah. Whatever. We were clowning around with names. No, it was Polar Predators, and that one was Yetis, snow monsters, snow beasts, and all that. Well, we said back then what we're going to do this summer is a Sasquatch summer. So that's what we're going with starting in June. So it's just going to all be hot and sweaty Sasquatch monster movies for the better part of 3 months, starting in June. So maybe sometime after that we can get to more atomic horror 50 style stuff, right? So,
Yeah.
but before we tease what's coming up next week, we need to do our usual bit. So, Tiana, we'll start with you. What's the kill count for this one?
Kill count for this one is actually kind of surprising. You wouldn't think it would be 35,
Wow.
but it is, but it's because of that, the theater.
Yeah.
system.
Yeah, there's that. That's the big moment, right? So yeah, that's probably
Yeah.
where it's stacking up the bodies there for sure. And that's when it starts to get like massively big and more out
Yeah.
of control, right? So
Yeah.
that checks. Let's talk about the kill reel.
Highlight. Kill.
I'm struggling to think of one in particular. I will say when you're leading up to that last part where they're in the diner and they're underneath there, like that's pretty fucking bleak. I know that they got out of it, right? But like
Yeah.
it was looking like holy shit, like they're all gonna die and they're taking this little boy with them and everything. This is horrible. And then they find a way out of it. But God, I don't know. I guess maybe the very first guy.
Yeah, like that guy or the doctor.
Yeah, because remember, like, the dude gets it on his hand, and it kind of slowly starts growing on his hand, and then eventually the dude just fucking disappears, right? But, like, I don't remember there being, like, an outright bloody kind of thing in this, right? Like,
No.
bloody kill or anything like that, so... Yeah, I guess I'll go with that one, because that's the one they make you look at a little bit more, because most of them's like, oh, no! Ah! And then it'll be behind something, and then they're just gone.
I don't think
Do you even come to think of it? Is there ever a moment in this movie where you actually see the blob eat anybody?
it's real quick, but it's the doctor part in the window, but you don't see very much of it, but it's real quick too.
And that's what Steve McQueen's
And
character,
that's
Steve, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
he
Yeah.
sees it and then what the fuck,
Yeah.
And,
And that's the scene that got trimmed down, I think.
Yeah.
I guess it was a little bit more gruesome, and they trimmed it down
Maybe,
because
yeah.
of for the time period.
yeah. I guess I'll go with the first guy. Kind of melded into the doctor thing, right? Because that was all kind of the same scene. So we'll go with that for the highlight
Yeah.
kill. That leads us to you, Smoke.
Gore score.
Yeah, we've just been alluding to it, but yeah, I mean, there's not really anything to speak of. It's 1958. I mean, yeah, there might be some exploitation movies that we'll eventually get to that has, a little bit of blood in it from late 50s or whatever, but this isn't one of them. I don't know that there's a drop of it really, other than we're talking about that scene just now, where Steve McQueen sees the doc in the window with the blob on his head. But it's very, very, very short. And like I said, it was trimmed. I mean, if that was to surface as an uncut, and I don't know that it has. I don't think so. I guess maybe that footage doesn't exist anymore or whatever.
I doubt it.
As it is now, though, I can't go any higher. I don't think than a half on the gore score rating here because it's I mean it's 1958. It's classic horror, and it's again there were some exploitation movies at this time still too. I think a movie even earlier called Maniac, not that Maniac, not the William Lustig Maniac from the 80s, but no one from a classic era that was an exploitation film that had some shots. So there are some movies that we will get to eventually that do have some more violence from this period, but yeah, as the Blob stands, it's classic, released in wide, not a the drive-in thing, but not what you would consider an exploitation grindhouse movie. So yeah, half on the gore score for that.
Yeah, that's probably about right. I mean, like there's nothing over the top about this one. I mean, it's more implied or like, holy shit, it's going to get me, and then they kind of flail around or fall or don't try to run, and then they just disappear, kind of thing. So it's one of those kind of flicks.
Yeah. Now they would bring the gore when it came to the remake in 1988.
Yeah.
30 years later.
Yeah. That I remember a little bit more.
Yeah.
For there being a little bit more gore in that one. They upped the ante. Yeah, so that's it for the Blob. That's where we'll leave it. Sorry about that weird jump in time, but shit happens, right?
Yeah.
Next week, we're going to be, speaking of jumps in time, we're going to be jumping ahead a week to next week, and we're going to be doing Cannon Fodder. So it's the latest in our Cannon film series where we randomly spin the wheel of like every Cannon movie that, pretty much all the ones that had something to do with Golan Globus produced or written or directed or whatever, something that they had their fingers on. And we've got them all on the wheel. We spin it, and whatever it lands on, as long as we can find a copy to watch, That's the one that we're talking about. So that explains why we're watching this movie, and it's called Hannah's War. So we get to enjoy the nonstop fun of a biopic about World War II and the atrocities of the Holocaust. So that's a horror of a different kind, I guess. Come back and join in the fun next week as we celebrate Cinco de Mayo here on the Spook Show by talking about Hannah's War. So there you go. That's it. So I guess for Tiana, Professor Smoke, I'm Josh. We are the All-American Spook Show, and we'll talk to you next week.
As you leave the theater, folks, please be careful. Don't let this happen to your car. Be sure to remove the speaker before you leave. If you should accidentally pull a speaker loose, please turn it in at our snack bar or box office. Thank you.